Welcome to the first part of the Avodas HaParsha shir that took place last night in beautiful Kilas Ner Avram and Shari Chesed Yerushalayim. A shir, as all the shirim in Elo, sponsored by the Oppenheim family, the Hatzlacha of their children and all the children of Am Yisrael. The Houthis were kind enough to shoot a rocket in the first 10 minutes of the shir, and due to a couple of mix-ups, we're going to be re-recording this first part in my home in Givat Zev, and then you will be rejoining the shir when we move down to the safe room in the shul, which is what one does when the alarms go off. So we introduced the pasuk that we're going to be speaking about. In Parshas Savo we have the Tochacha, and the Tochacha is a description of, I guess you could almost call it a corrective process, a very painful corrective process that gets triggered if Am Yisrael do too much wrong. Okay, this is something that's built into the DNA of the world. The Kosher Magid asked the famous question of Medrash and Chazal, speaking about the very beginning of Bereshis, says that the pasuk V'ha'aretz hoysa tohu v'avohu v'choshech al pnei tehom, that the world was all this upside downness and darkness and confusion, and they darshaned those four terms to be referring to the four malchios, the four kingdoms that Am Yisrael have to go through if they end up going into Golus. And those are, says Tohu is Bavel, Vohu is Paras and Modai, Persia, Media, Choshech is Yovan, Greece, and Tehom, the depths, refers to Malchus Edom, which transformed into Rome, which transforms into the heritage of the Western world in Christianity that is still here today. So it is a process which is painful, but which is meant to correct aspects of Am Yisrael's behavior that they had to transform in order to come back, and hopefully come back better than ever with the building of the Bayis Shlishim Meher V'Yameinu. So one of the most puzzling psukim in the Tochacha gives a reason for these punishments, and it seems incongruous. And over the years, I've looked at many Mefarshim and many approaches to this pasuk, and we'll look at a new one tonight. It says, this comes to you because you didn't serve Hashem your God with simcha, with happiness, betuv levov, and a good heart, merov kol, from too much. Let's leave that translation as that. So the Rizhiner Rebbe, right, is a collection, Irin Kadishin, of teachings of the Rizhiner Rebbe, and he parses the pasuk differently and comes up with the following perush. Right, it's very difficult to think that with all the harsh averas that brought about the destruction of the first Beis HaMedrash, second Beis HaMedrash, and now it says, you know what else? It is because you didn't have enough simcha. You weren't happy enough. So he explains it like this. It says, B'Shem HaSaba Kadisha Merushin Zchuso Yogin Aleinu. He says the perush is like this. Tachas asher lo avaratos Hashem Elokecho, that these punishments come to you because you didn't serve Hashem, comma, and also that you're not serving Hashem was besimcha. Zosameres, what this means is, Bizman she'iev shar lavod es Hashem Yisborach, machmas ones kolshu. Sometimes there's what's called ones, circumstances beyond our control. And Chazal's statement about a situation of ones is ones rachmona patre, that in a case of ones, when circumstances are beyond your control, so the Torah exempts you from whatever it is you can't do because it's not due to your negligence, it's simply beyond your control. Says the Rizhiner, but when you had such situations, when you were in a situation of ones and you couldn't do a certain mitzvah, or you were forced to do something that the Torah would usually forbid, you did it b'simcha. You enjoyed it, you rejoiced in it. And he says, Yesh li zoher milios oz b'simcha. And you have to be very careful not to be b'simcha in that case. Okay. So for those unfamiliar, you're now in the lovely safe room of Congregation Ner Avram here in Shari Chesed Yerushalayim, waiting for the all clear sign to go. after a variety of things are being shot at us. Okay, HaKadosh Baruch Hu protect. Okay, so we just brought the pshat from the Rizhiner who said, Tachas asher lo avadas Hashem Elokecha. He said, the problem, something which brings about this extra dimension of the punishment, is because you didn't serve Hashem, right? B'simcha v'tuv levav, meaning you're not serving Hashem was done with great simcha. Okay, now that makes sense to us. And otherwise, a person, if you have an onus, right? If a person is stuck someplace, it's true. You can't, read Megillah because you have no Megillah on Purim. And if a person says, oh, good, I always found the Megillah too long anyway, and he's happy about it, so then, right, that obviously is a problem. But what I want to do is explore this issue a little bit, because I'll tell you why I had difficulty with it, right, from a few sources.
Kind
Please.
of like the Gemara in Sota of how the Goyim left the sukkah.
Right, kicking.
Okay?
Yeah.
They were honest.
Exactly.
The sun came out,
excellent
and
example.
they left and kicked it and said, who needs this?
Right. That's what Shevach is mentioning, is that the Gemara in Sota that says in the future that the nations of the world will say, Rebbeinu Shalom, if you give us the Torah, so maybe we would have done it too, and we would get the reward that Am Yisrael gets. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, fine, there's a small mitzvah, it's called Sukkah, here you go. And they go into the Sukkah, and Kadosh Baruch Hu unleashes the full force of the sun, which made them mitztayer, right? And mitztayer is potur min ha-sukkah, when a person is uncomfortable to the point that he wouldn't stay in that situation at home if he could. So they left, and they kicked the sukkah and left. So the Gemara asked, but Jews are also potur from the sukkah. If it's that roasting hot, you also leave the sukkah. They said, but they kicked. Okay, meaning that anger that the sukkah got them in there is kind of equivalent to the idea of being happy to be potur from it. Correct. There's some people also, it rains on sukkahs. Oh, good, I can sit in my nice living room, right, and eat in the dining room with all this, without, the bugs and all these things, etc. So we can understand that. But here's where it got tricky for me. A person is supposed to serve Hashem b'simcha on all circumstances, meaning our circumstances always limit us in different ways. And what we have to look for in those circumstances is what Hashem wants us to do, and then to do that with simcha. Right? Again, I'll quote very quickly one of the most famous stories, Rebbe Elimelech and Reb Zusha, right, that were traveling and they got put into jail, as often happens to tzaddikim in these stories. And Reb Zusha noticed Rebbe Elimelech looking sad there in the Russian jail cell. And he says, why do you look like that? So he pointed at the bucket, which was given for people's, latrine needs. And he says, we can't learn in here, we can't daven in here. So Reb Zusha said, right, so that's how we serve Hashem here, by not learning and not davening. And they started dancing around the bucket, and the guards started saying, what's with that? And they said, I don't know, these guys are like really excited about this bucket. So he said, fine, I'll take it away. Okay, that's the happy ending to the story, at least for that period of time. But it illustrates a very important thing, meaning if Hashem puts you in circumstances where you now can't learn and can't daven, so your Avodas Hashem b'simcha has to now be rerouted into those circumstances there. So if we take what the Rizhiner says the wrong way, that would mean that Rebbe Elimelech and Reb Zusha would have to sit there sad and downtrodden in the thing because of thinking of all the mitzvahs that they can't do because of their situation of onus. The bottom line of that story seems to imply that that's not the way it's supposed to be. But let's go even before Hasidic stories. Right? There's a Gemara, the famous Gemara in Chagiga, Daf Hey Amud Beis, Rav Idi, right, the father of Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, who had a very strange yearly schedule. He used to leave his house after Pesach, and he used to travel for months to get to the yeshiva where he wanted to learn, Rabbi Yochanan's yeshiva. And he would come into the yeshiva and he would learn and learn and learn for one day and one night. The next morning, he would leave. Why? Because if he didn't leave that day, he wouldn't be able to get home to be mesameach his family, his wife on Yontif, right? Meaning Sukkot. So this was the way he traveled. This became a joke in the yeshiva a bit, and they gave him a nickname. The Barbe Rav Dechad Yoma, the one-day yeshiva bacher. Because it was a very strange phenomenon. One day a year, right, the door burst open and this man who'd been like on the road for 3 months comes rushing in, learns up, and then goes. And the Gemara ends, right, that he was upset when he heard them making fun of him. Rabbi Yochanan said a drasha on the pasuk of Osi Yom Yom Yidrushun, says that if a person is seeking me out, right, even one day, so it's considered as if he was doing it all year. But Rabbi Isaac Sher, the son-in-law of Alter Slobodka, who founded the Slobodka Yeshiva here in Bnei Brak, so he dramatized this very much. He said, you have to imagine that Gemara. Imagine Rav Idi like going through bad weather, schlepping along the roads, and finally getting there. Imagine the light on his face when he finally sees the yeshiva and opens the door and sees the Sfarim. Even Barry is so he said, imagine when he comes in, how he would light up. And then he said he learns that night. It's the next morning. Once again, he has his walking stick in his hand. He has his backpack on his back, and he opens the door of the yeshiva, this time to leave. Asked Rabbi Isaac, what did his face look like? He said, it looked exactly the same as when he walked in. The same light, the same excitement, the same simcha, the same anticipation. Why? He says, because learning Torah is predicated on a principle called lomid al manas lasos. I learn in order to do that which the Torah tells me to do. So here I was able to learn in this yeshiva for this day, but now the Torah wants me to leave. And therefore I do that with simcha. Rather than the way most people would imagine it, that he's crying his eyes out, that he has to leave, right, after he spent so much to come. No, he did what he did, and it's there. I'll tell you why this touched a nerve in me. Years ago, in one of the, from magazines or whatever, there was a woman who wrote in a letter, and she was complaining about, and again, this is not the forum for the discussion of this halachic issue, we're just going to have to touch on it a little bit, is she said that she hears women happily declaring how they spoke to the Rav, and the Rav gave them a heter to use birth control. And she says she thinks this is terrible for them to be happy. They should be crying, right? They should be feeling horrible, that for whatever reason they've been rejected and not able to bring more Jewish souls into the world, etc. I was very upset by that. Because, again, the principle that we have here is when a woman goes to a Rav to ask a question about that, she wants to know, what is the Ratzon Hashem for me to do? I have various aspects to my avoda. Meaning, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I have children, I have my health, I have the family's health, I have psychological, I have all sorts of things that go into that question. And you're coming to find out what is the best thing for me to do al pi Torah. And if that best thing to do now is not to have children, then that is what I should do with simcha. Okay, meaning, this is where we're trying to come with the razor to divide what the Rizhiner was saying and what we're saying here. The Rizhiner was saying a person shouldn't be happy about the not doing, right? But he wasn't saying that you should be miserable and not doing what you can do b'simcha, right? Meaning, it rained on Sukkot. It's true, you can't go out from the sukkah. So you shouldn't be dancing around your fancy dining room saying, zippity-doo-dah, I don't have to be in the sukkah, right? That's what it is. But don't sit there, right? It's Tisha B'Av in your living room. Say, okay, we can't sit in the sukkah now, but it's still Sukkot, it's still Yom Tov, still have a Samachta B'Chagecha, let's go, right? And to do it in that way. And the same thing in that very sensitive decision which is there. This is not meant for a person to go into Avelus when you came to ask, what does Hashem want me to do now? That means he doesn't want my avodah to take this branch. I'll just point out, there's a great posek here in Yerushalayim, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Kahana. He's one of the dayanim for the Badats. And years ago I heard he had a series of lectures that he gave to women on various issues in the laws of Taras HaMishpacha, because he wanted them to hear from him firsthand. He said oftentimes women only get things second and third hand, and they're not. And in touching on that idea, he says, every woman should feel free to ask about this issue for whatever reason she's feeling, right, that it's not the time for her to become pregnant. He says, don't let people bully you with stories about their great-grandmother, Hinda Bela, who had 17 kids and would chop wood in the forest all day and smoked a pack of cigarettes every day, or something like that. He says, whatever nature may have been back then, he says, you have to deal with your reality, and you have to do that. So, and this is something to be done b'simcha. More examples. One of the ones that always comes to mind when we approach Yom Neroim is the idea of people who have to eat on Yom Kippur. Okay, I had that once during Corona. I had Corona and I was told to eat, with what's called shiurim, with measures. But a variety of people, sometimes due to illness, right? It's one of the questions that Rabbanim are very busy with before Yom Kippur, Rabbanim and doctors. And there were many Rabbanim who were very busy with checking that those people who were told to eat on Yom Kippur would actually eat. Rabbi Lev, Shlita, Matisyo, had a fascinating story. He said that there was a man in his shul who came to him a bit before Yom Kippur. He said, Rabbi, I spoke with my doctor, and he says, because of my condition, whatever it is, that I'll have to eat on Yom Kippur. So he said, in case you'll have to eat, and I'll guide you how to do it in the best way. Anyway, it's the break in Yom Kippur after Musaf. He suddenly realizes this guy never came to ask him how he's supposed to be eating. So he comes over to him. He says, Fred, you never spoke to me about the eating. He says, Rabbi, I've been keeping Yom Kippur all my life. I'm not going to stop now. He says, then you can no longer be a member of our congregation. He says, what? I'm fasting on Yom Kippur. He says, you have to understand. He says, the Torah says that you have to eat today on Yom Kippur. You are an idolater. You worship an idol called Yom Kippur. It's telling you to fast. He said, we cannot have idol worshippers here. We have people who follow Torah. Right? A very sharp way of saying it. So, but it is hard. It is hard, right? Yom Kippur is a day that's so special. But nonetheless, so here is a letter that was written by Rabbi Shua of Belz, right? Rabbi Shua of Belz to his mechutin, who was one of the Rizhiner Rebbe's. Rabbi Nachum Mendel was called the Tzemach Tzadik of Vishnitz. And he wrote this letter in Aseres Yimei Tshuva, and it was just before the Tzemach Tzadik passed away, a couple months before. He was very weak, and the doctors told him not to eat. But he was refusing, and he decided he was going to fast. So the Belzer Rebbe sent to him a letter in order to let him know what he should do. So it starts off with lots of honorifics, etc. He says, I've come to you with this letter. Ki lepela ba'ena, he says, I'm amazed, sheshamati, that I heard, ki ola murah b'lev anash Hashem aleim yichyu, right, that your Hasidim are afraid that you're planning to fast on Yom Kippur. He says, who could believe such a thing about such an Ish Kodesh as you, right? The same shepherd of the flock commanded us not to eat on Yom Kippur. And in the time that you have to do it, it says, the mitzvah of the Torah that overrides here is taking care of your health. And he gives it an example. He says, I remember when my father was sick, and we went around, right, worried that maybe, even though the doctors told him to eat on Yom Kippur, that he wouldn't eat. But who, begodel tzidkaso, he, in his great righteousness, was zoris bedover. He was very energetic about following the doctor's orders. Tekef acharei kol nidre, right after kol nidre, miher v'tziva litin le'lechol k'fi she'etzarech. He quickly told people to bring him the food that he needed to eat, and he said with this lashon before eating, Hareini muchon u'mezumen l'kayim mitzvahs bari k'fi she'omru Chazal. I am now about to fulfill the mitzvah of my Creator as defined by Chazal, and he ate b'simcha yasera. He ate that food with great simcha. He said, Kimat lo ra'inu simcha kazos rak ba'achilas matzah netilas lulav. The only other times we saw him in such a state of simcha was when he ate matzah at the Leila Seder and when he took lulav on Sukkot. Okay, so therefore he says, I'm sure that you will also, right, be zoris and follow the orders of your doctors. He says, especially a big person that the eyes of Am Yisrael are on him has to be especially careful. Because if you're machmir, maybe others will learn from you and come to danger. He says, you should know, it's against my will to have to write to you and tell you what I think you should do, but because you're so precious to me, that's why I took this step. So that, again, is the picture. That's not what the Rizhiner is talking about, right? The Rizhiner would be talking about someone who says, oh, good, I hate fasting. I'm so glad I got the flu and the doctor told me, right, to have a cup of coffee or something. Here, we're talking about this is going to be your Avodas Yom Kippur. And you have to do that Avodas Yom Kippur b'simcha. That's the form that it's supposed to take. Right? There's an expression Chazal use, Ketino kaborech mibeis hasefer. Right? That if for whatever reason, right, the school has to close down, those kids, right, go with great joy. That we don't want to have. Now, what did it have to do with the end of the pasuk? This the Rizhiner didn't fill in. Okay, the pasuk ended. Let's read the whole pasuk again. So the way the Rizhiner read it is because you're not serving Hashem, you did with great simcha when you were in a situation of ones, merov kol, from so much everything. A variety of perushim on that. I want to go to the Ibn Ezra's perush. Merov kol, from so much asher tisave o kol tzarech. Meaning, there are so many things that you desire and so many things maybe that you need that's what you're focused on, right? So if Judaism is getting in your way from these things that you want or need, and now, due to some situation beyond your control, the Judaism has, so to speak, that aspect of the Torah is stepped aside, so suddenly you're jumping on it. B'simcha. Okay? That's what it means. I've been asked, not by a few young people, they become enamored of this concept that exists in the community of the religion called the Amish. Okay, and there they have this concept, I think it's called Rumspringer. Rumspringer is the following. When you're 18 and you're Amish, they're in Pennsylvania, Dutch country, wherever you are, so you are able to take a year off from being Amish, where no Amish halachas apply to you whatsoever. Meaning, you get on a bus, young man, you go to Manhattan and spend the year, you can do whatever you want. No limits at all. At the end of the year, you have to decide, do I want to be Amish? And you go back and you're in, or do I not? And see you later. Surprisingly, they say a bunch of them like to go back. It's a good life, a healthy life. They make a lot of money selling furniture to tourists and things like that. But, so many Jewish kids say, why doesn't Judaism have something like that? That is kind of what the Rizhiner was talking about. Meaning, we have to think carefully if what we're giving over is a Judaism, that this fantasy is that I could have a year off. Right? That I could have a year off from it. They tell a story, interesting story. Rebbe Rizhiner Rebbe and Reb Shimshon Pincus used to work together a lot. They would speak and run seminars here in Eretz Yisrael. Anyway, so I saw when something brought down a conversation they had, that the question was, what would you do if you discovered you weren't Jewish? So Rebbe Rizhiner said, I would immediately go and convert, right? I don't know, as quick as possible. Shimshon Pincus said, I'd like to have a day first. And he said, you, Reb Shimshon, you want a day before becoming Jewish? What in the world would you want to do on that day? He says that according to the halacha, a non-Jew can bring a korban on a private bama, a private altar. He says, I would be able to build a bama in my backyard and bring an actual korban, then I'd convert the next day. Apparently Rebbe Rizhiner told me, he says, it's not worth it even for that. He says, it's not, to not be Jewish, he says, to miss that for the day. So again, right, it's this idea of approach. Are you viewing it, and unfortunately many people, right, sometimes have that sense about one aspect of Judaism, about Judaism as a whole, that if only circumstances could come about that I could get away with it without being punished, right? That I wouldn't have to do it and God wouldn't be upset with me. That's what the Rizhiner is talking about. But we shouldn't make that the mistake of thinking that when we bump into our limitations in life, and all of us have limitations, that we're supposed to be looking at what we can't do and mourning. No, you focus on what you can do and the avodah that you have, and you do that with simcha, whatever form it takes. There's one last quote. This is a fascinating collection of letters from the Nesiv Shalom, the previous Rizhiner Rebbe. And in here are letters to his granddaughter. Very fascinating set of letters, one for a bas mitzvah, one for her 17th birthday. This is one from the 18th birthday. And he gives her different guidance for life. And he says, Klal Godel Yeshli B'chaim. He says, I have one big general rule in life. Ki argosha shel osher she'odam kovea belibo. The sense, the feeling of osher is not just happiness, but it means of being fortunate. Kolomar, he says, you set that in your heart. What it means to say is, Ani mu'ushar b'chol atnoim shenosan li'akadosh baruch hu. I am happy, feeling fortunate with all the conditions that Hashem gave me in my life, many of which are limitations, right? This may mean that I'm physically weak. This may mean that I'm financially limited. This may mean that I'm in a community that has limitations, all sorts of stuff. It says, Zen nosin la'odam as ha'osher be'emes. That gives you this true happiness. The opposite is hargashat umlalut. To feel umlal means, best translation is to feel like a nebuch. To feel like a nebuch, to feel like a loser. Because look at me, I don't have this, I don't have that, right? This limits me in what I could do in my Judaism. This limits me, etc. He says, a person is doing that to himself. He says, and that person is truly umlal, truly a nebuch. He says, you're supposed to try to look with simcha at the situation HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you, and to that which you're supposed to do and able to do in there. And that is the type of simcha that we're supposed to have, not the negative simcha that the Rizhiner was pointing out to us. I think it's very important to have, right, what they call in yeshiva language, the tzvei dinim, right, two separate dinim that may appear similar on the outside, but are actually very, very different on the inside. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu send us besaros tovos, and may we be able to serve Him besimcha easily in all circumstances. Kol tuv.